全体会議を始めさせていただきたいと思います。3人のパネリスト、お二人のコーディネーターの方々もご着席いただいていますので、それではコーディネーターの川崎さん、ジャクリン・カバッソーさん、よろしくお願いいたします。
皆さんおはようございます。朝からこれだけ多くの方々が集まってくださいましてありがとうございます。この全体会議のコーディネーターをこちらのアメリカの西部諸州法律財団のジャックリーヌ・カバソさんと一緒に務めさせていただきます。私、川崎明と申します。核兵器廃絶国際キャンペーンの共同代表をしておりまして、また日本のピースボートで活動をしております。でこの全体会議ということで、核兵器の非人道性を基礎に世界はこれから何をなすべきかというテーマが今日のこの2時間のお話のテーマになっていますけれども、これから何をなすべきかというところがとても大事なところになります。昨日の会議にもご参加なさった方々はいろんな情報を得られたと思うんですね。昨日の一日の話の中では、例えば核兵器に頼らない安全保障の在り方はどのようにすればいいんだろうかとか、あるいは核兵器を禁止するための法律的な枠組みの話ということもですね、かなり出たわけであります。でまた今日日本の私たちにとって非常に喫緊の問題であるこの福島の問題と核兵器の問題の関わり、あるいは昨日の若者ユースの分科会も非常にたくさんの方が集まって盛り上がったというふうに聞いておりますけれども、このようにいろいろなですね、これから行動をしていくにあたっての手がかりを昨日は1日かけて得ることができたというふうに思います。でこうしたことをですね、ある意味でお勉強に終わらせずに私たち自身の行動につなげていくというようなそういうアイディアをですね、今日は多くのパネリストの皆さんからヒントをいただいて、この会場でもしっかりと議論していきたいというふうに思っております。で会の進め方になりますけれども、まずオーストラリアの IPPNW、国際医師会議の共同代表であり、また ICAN の共同代表でもあるティルマン・ラフさんからですね、このメキシコ会議に向けてということで、この核の非人道性というこの一番のテーマですね、これをテーマにした来年2月のメキシコの国際会議に向けたお話をまずいただきます。でその後にですね、オランダ IKV パックスクリスティのスージー・スナイダーさんからですね、この核の傘に守られている国の役割ということで、これ実はオランダのようなヨーロッパの国もそうですが、日本もそうですけれども、アメリカの核の傘というものが必要だというふうに政府はこう言ってるわけですね。こういった国々の人々の役割、そしてその次にデイビッド・クリーガーさん、アメリカの核時代平和財団の会長さんでいらっしゃいますけれども、長くアメリカで核兵器に反対する活動を続けてきたお立場からこの市民被爆者の役割と、こういったことについてですね、15分ずつのお話をいただきます。でそこで短い休憩を取りまして、その後私たちコーディネーターからも簡単なコメントをさせていただきまして、そして、フロアとの質疑討論というふうに入っていきたいと思います。でこのフロアとの質疑討論というのは本当に皆さんにこう手を挙げていただいて、フロアにマイクを回しますので、そこから質問意見をどんどんと出していただきまして、最後ジャクリン・カバソさんにまとめていただいて、会を終わると。とにかくこの2時間の中で自分ができること、この後やっていけることをですね、1つでも2つでも持ち帰っていただきたいということですので、そういう心の準備をしていただきながら、一人一人のお話に入っていきたいというふうに思います。
So I want to express my deep appreciation to the organizers of the conference, to Mayor Kawe, for inviting me to be here for the 5th Global Citizens Assembly for the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. It is a great honor that I have been a participant in all 5 of the Global Citizens Assemblies. I think along with Dr. Krieger, we are the only 2 internationals who have been with you for all 5 conferences. And it's also been a great honor to serve on the drafting committee for the appeal at each of those sessions. You'll be getting that, you'll be receiving that appeal later today. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Tilman Ruff from IPPNW, Australia.
Thank you very much. While the screen is coming down, I really want to talk to you about 2 things. One is the significance of the forthcoming conference in Mexico. And secondly, I'd like to speak about the importance of evidence in our work. The recent refocus on the humanitarian dimensions of this issue as the core of what must drive policy has several threads, and it's important to be aware that this is very firmly anchored, not a distraction, but firmly anchored in the NPT 2010 Review Conference statement expressing concern about the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. It's also been increasingly supported by a growing number of countries signing humanitarian statements over the last 2 years. The statements have changed somewhat, but the number has grown impressively from 16 to most recently at the UN 125. And of course, the involvement of the Red Cross in a more substantial and deeper way in the elimination of nuclear weapons as an urgent humanitarian priority is also an important recent development. The conference that was held in Oslo in March was the first ever intergovernmental meeting focused on the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. It's extraordinary that this was the first such meeting in 2013, and I asked myself, why not in Japan? But it was attended by 127 governments, but it was boycotted by the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, who called it a distraction. Norwegian Foreign Minister Eide said, I think, some important concluding remarks about the significance of the meeting. That the conference had succeeded in reframing the issue, in putting humanitarian concerns at the centre, confirming that this is a concern for everyone, the importance of a sense of urgency, and of the benefits of civil society and governments being much more powerful when working together. What do I take from the Oslo conference? I think a couple of reflections I'd like to make. 2/3 of all the world's governments came. And it was clear that in some regions of the world, particularly in Africa and Latin America, there is a very strong cohesive view among the governments. The involvement of government, international organisations, Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, and civil society was very powerful in shifting the focus to the humanitarian dimensions and drawing the lessons about the value of that focus in progress on other indiscriminate weapons. At the conference, Mexico announced a follow-up meeting in February next year to continue this focus on evidence-based review of the real effects of nuclear weapons. And we hope this will provide the basis for further steps responding to these unacceptable effects. There was widespread acceptance by the governments of the evidence that was presented about the catastrophic consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, about the lack of any capacity to respond adequately to any use of nuclear weapons, about the risk of use remaining as long as the weapons exist. And this was the first recognition of the very important new work about the effects on the global climate and food supply of even a relatively small, in nuclear terms, nuclear war. And I think particularly the involvement of Red Cross on the civil society side has been a very important step. It became clear that the governments that may be prepared to lead this initiative and next steps really want coordinated civil society partners to work together. And I would reflect that political resistance, which has already become apparent to this kind of humanitarian focus and to where the nuclear armed states are worried that it might be heading, is a good sign. You don't make change without meeting some resistance. And the boycott of the P5, I think, was widely perceived as very arrogant and defensive, and the justification that this was a distraction was really not plausible. And I think it's interesting to reflect that the countries that are willing to target nuclear weapons at each other can unite so quickly when the nuclear club, their possession of nuclear weapons, is threatened. The objective of ICAN is for governments to make a political commitment to start negotiations on a treaty to ban nuclear weapons within a specified time frame. And we hope that such a commitment might come either out of or soon after the Mexico conference. That's really our goal at this point, is our assessment of the best next step towards a world free of nuclear weapons. And I think the Austrian President's remark at the General Assembly really encapsulates this view. Nuclear weapons should be stigmatised, banned and eliminated. The humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons have to be put at the centre of our attention. Let me say something about evidence and its importance coming to Mexico. Evidence has played a very important role in the progress that we have made towards constraining these worst of all weapons. Nuclear tests in the atmosphere were common. There have been thousands of nuclear tests altogether that contaminated the whole world with radioactive fallout. And it was evidence from physicians collecting the milk teeth of babies showing increasing levels of strontium-90 in the teeth of the milk teeth of babies. That was a very important push for the end of nuclear testing in the atmosphere. It was evidence from scientists and physicians that civil defence programs against nuclear war were deceptive and unfeasible. That led to the end of those programs. it was the involvement of the World Health Organization and other major international scientific collaborations documenting the consequences of nuclear weapons and the impossibility of any meaningful response in the early 1980s that led the World Health Organization to identify nuclear weapons as the greatest immediate threat to health and welfare, and had a very profound political influence, including through the work of IPPNW at the highest political levels. Mikhail Gorbachev said repeatedly how important this evidence was in his realization that nuclear weapons must be abolished and that the Cold War must end. And David Lange, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, made a similar comment, that physicians in New Zealand had made medical reality a part of political reality. Gorbachev was particularly moved by the evidence of the global climatic consequences, the so-called nuclear winter, and has referred to this on numerous occasions as to how important this was in his motivation to end the Cold War and reduce nuclear arsenals. We need that kind of evidence to be renewed and again to drive policy. The most important advance in our knowledge of the effects of nuclear weapons in recent decades has been the extraordinary work of Alan Robot and colleagues, climate scientists, who've used our modern understanding of the atmosphere to examine the effects of even a relatively small nuclear war, such as could occur using just half the arsenals of India and Pakistan, a tiny fraction of the world's nuclear arsenal. But targeted on cities would inject 5 million tons of smoke high into the atmosphere, cooling and darkening the surface of the Earth, spreading widely, lofted high into the atmosphere, cooling and darkening the surface of the Earth for a full decade. Other colleagues have shown that this would have dramatic effects on production of important food crops. Here, the effect on rice production in China. Within the first 3 years, more than 25% reduction in rice production just from the cooling and drying effect. In the northern province of Heilongjiang, in the first year, there would be no rice produced at all. And this effect is seen across many crops, including up to 40% declines in wheat production. And similar effects in other grain-growing regions can be expected. There are already almost 900 million people who don't get enough food every day. And currently, global grain reserves would provide only enough food for about 2 months. They would not be sufficient for 10 years of reduced production. This relatively small nuclear war would have profound implications, causing starvation on a scale we have never seen before. And if one considers the nuclear warheads on just one nuclear-armed submarine, they're capable of producing not 5 million tons of smoke, but 23 million tons of smoke. This means that even the nuclear arsenals of Israel, Pakistan and India are a suicide bomb and are a global threat. So I think the evidence about what nuclear weapons can do has been deliberately neglected. I think governments who own the weapons don't want us to know the reality. And there has been no significant international report examining the effects of nuclear weapons for 20 years. This is extraordinary. So for Mexico, what needs to happen? I think we should urge our governments to support and participate in the conference, to send strong delegations, including experts like Tominaga, who was in Oslo, including Global Debacha and parliamentarians to engage with their parliaments, civil society and media before, during and after this conference, and to make a substantive contribution to bring evidence to Mexico. I particularly think that examining the effects of nuclear war now on countries and regions, particularly the global climate and the food security, no government has yet examined these atmospheric findings and applied them what would happen in our country, in our region. This research needs to be done. When it has a name and an address, it is much more powerful. And also the risks of nuclear weapons use will be examined in Mexico. And this is another important topic that countries could contribute evidence on. I think we should build the expectation that the conference in Mexico should be a point of no return for new steps to address the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. And there is a special responsibility, I believe, for nuclear dependent and therefore nuclear targeted states like Japan and my own country to contribute to the evidence base if they are serious about addressing the humanitarian dimensions of this problem, and to decisively move to become part of the solution and not part of the problem. I thank you.